Hello and welcome to Right Sports Talk. My name is Zach. With NFL training camps being just a few weeks away, I just wanted to talk about some questions we have for each team, or questions that I have for each team going into the 2026 NFL season. Last year I did something kind of similar to this, but I just talked about things going in throughout training camp. But this year I wanted to talk about questions that I have for each team that go throughout the entire season. I'm going to start with the AFC right now. I will later make a video on the NFC teams. So to kick it off, I'm going to start off with the AFC North. The first team we're going to talk about and the questions we have for them are the Baltimore Ravens. Question I have for them is, what does this team look like this season without John Harbaugh as head coach? And what does their offense look like without Todd Monken as their offensive coordinator? So, Fed John Harbaugh since 2008. At the end of the season, he was fired. They hired the Chargers defense coordinator, Jesse Minter, as the new head coach. They also got rid of Todd Monken as their OC. They brought in the offense coordinator from the Bears to fill that position. I was curious as to what this offense is going to look like, as Todd Monken was a very big run-heavy type of offensive coordinator. Do they still have that same style of offense? Is Lamar Jackson still going to be a running more quarterback, or is he going to be more of a passing quarterback this year? Are they are they going to have more of a consistent passing game? They did bring in two big-bodied wide receivers in the draft, and Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt, to kind of hopefully pair them with Zay Flowers, who's more of the smaller, shifty, could probably move into the slot type receiver. So I'm just interested to see, what this team looks like under Jesse Minter. Because they've had the same head coach since 2008, and what the offense looks like with this change in offensive coordinator is they've had, kind of a run-first mentality in Todd Monken since I want to say around 2018, 2019 timeframes. As long as they've had Lamar Jackson, Todd Monken had been their OC. Lamar Jackson played some of his best football with Todd Monken as offensive coordinator. So what does that look like now that there's been the change? That's really my questions for the Ravens. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. My main question for the Bengals is, have they upgraded their defense enough to help make a true Super Bowl push? One of the things for the Bengals the past really few years is, when Joe Burrow is healthy and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Chase Brown are all healthy, they have one of the best offenses in the NFL. Nobody can really stop their offense, but they have multiple times in which they scored 35 points in a game and they would lose. So I'm just wondering if they've done enough to help out their defense. Their defense last year was 30th in points allowed. They gave up 29 points a game. Their offense was scoring an average of 25 points a game. So still a very good offense, but not quite there on defense. So in the offseason, they added a handful of key defensive pieces. Their biggest one, they traded for defensive lineman Dexter Lawrence from the Giants, one of the best defensive tackles in the entire league, to help bolster that defensive line. They did lose Trey Hendrickson, unfortunately, in free agency, but they also added another veteran in Jonathan Allen. They brought in linebacker Boye Mafe. They brought in safeties Byron Cook and Kyle Duggar, who were both veteran good safeties, and they drafted defensive end Cassius Howell in this year's draft, a pretty good edge rusher in his own right that can hopefully produce and help this defense. So they've definitely invested in their defense this year to hopefully help out what is, when healthy, one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. So I'm just curious. So just have to wait and see if they've done enough to really make a Super Bowl, to really make a true Super Bowl push, and be competitive and in the playoffs, and hopefully try to make the Super Bowl. For the Cleveland Browns, question is, who is going to be their starting quarterback? Who's going to be their quarterback? And then what does their team look like without Myles Garrett? Obviously, the quarterback situation, they've had a very open quarterback competition with Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders primarily. Kind of put in Dylan Gabriel in there, but it looks like the top two frontrunners are Watson and Sanders. Watson, somebody that they traded multiple first round draft picks for and gave a lot of guaranteed money to back in 2022. Has not played a full season of football since 2020. He is coming off of an Achilles injury in 2024 that caused him to miss the entire 2025 season. Shedeur Sanders played decent in his time as a starter last season for Cleveland, but he didn't really stick out or do anything super great to, stand out as he is going to or should be the starter going into this year. I think it's a very open quarterback competition. I think at some point both of them will wind up will get playing time throughout the season. The question is who is going to win that quarterback competition. And then on defense, they traded away the heart and soul of their defense in Myles Garrett at the beginning of June to the LA Rams. They did get Jared Verse in that trade, and they do have a bunch of young key defensive pieces and second-year defensive lineman Mason Graham, second-year reigning defensive rookie of the year linebacker Carson Schlesinger. So they do still have some pieces, but how does that defense look without their heart and soul player, a player that just broke the NFL sack record last season? You have to imagine that their defense could possibly get a little bit worse from how it was the year before. And yes, that's my questions for the Browns. Moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. What does their team and their offense look like with Mike McCarthy as their head coach? They've no longer got Mike Tomlin. He stepped down at the end of last season. So now they bring in Mike McCarthy, who has experience coaching Aaron Rodgers when they were in Green Bay together. Does that experience help out their offense? I truly believe their defense should still look very good, even with Mike McCarthy there. And Mike McCarthy is an offensive guy, so he should hopefully be able to help out the offense. They've brought in some key pieces or some extra pieces. They brought in Michael Pittman to be a true, very good number 2 wide receiver next to DK Metcalf. They brought in Rico Dowdle to pair with Jaylen Warren, so they can hopefully maybe go back to the style they had a few years ago with Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, where Jaylen Warren was more of a change of pace back, and Najee was the short yardage, early down bruiser back. Maybe they could do that again with Rico and Jaylen Warren. Rico does have experience also playing under Mike McCarthy when Mike McCarthy was in Dallas. I was very curious to see, if this offense can make improvements with Mike McCarthy, a true offensive-minded coach leading them. So those are my questions for the AFC North teams. Moving on to the AFC East, I'm going to start with the Buffalo Bills. And can they regain dominance in the AFC East? The Buffalo Bills were the team to beat in the AFC East from 2020 through 2024. Last season, the Patriots were able to regain that division. But in the offseason, the Bills added DJ Moore, hopefully to be their true number 1 wide receiver. They have not had a true number 1 wide receiver the past couple seasons since Stephon Diggs left. Defensively, they added edge rusher Bradley Chubb in free agency. He can hopefully help bolster that defensive line, essentially taking the position that Joey Bosa filled last season, although Joe Bosa missed time due to injury. And hopefully Bradley Chubb can come in and stay healthy and help lead this defense and help lead this defensive line. Also offensively, they still have Josh Allen. They have one of arguably the best quarterback in the NFL in Josh Allen. So I think as long as they have Josh Allen, their window of being a dominant team can always be open. They did fire their head coach Sean McDermott. They essentially just promoted offensive coordinator Joe Brady to head coach, so it shouldn't be a whole lot of changes offensively. Hopefully, some of their new additions, DJ Moore, can step up and be a true number 1 wide receiver. They drafted Skylar Bell out of UConn, who's somebody that I am a big fan of. I really liked him in the draft process. I think he can really help out this team if he can get on the field. And obviously they still have James Cook, one of the better running backs in the entire league. So they still have all of the pieces there. They hopefully added a little bit in the receiving core, which is really one of their weak points, but they still have all the pieces. So now it's just, can they put it all together and regain their dominance of the AFC East? Now, moving on, the next team is the New England Patriots, a team that won the AFC East last year. And my question for them is, have they done enough to stay on top of the AFC East? So the Patriots, you can talk about how weak their schedule was, but they won their division, went to the Super Bowl last year, and then in the offseason added much needed help at wide receiver, which they've needed for years, bringing in A.J. Brown in a trade from the Eagles, also adding Rome Odunze in free agency from the Packers. That's two very, very good receivers. Both of them are better than any receiver they had the past few years, arguably since Julian Edelman has left. They added pieces on the offensive line. They brought in Elijah Vera Tucker to hopefully be their starting left guard. Then they can take Wilson, who was their rookie left guard last year, can put him back at center, which is a natural position. Hopefully Will Campbell can heal from his knee injury that he suffered last year, fully heal from that, and be ready to be a dominant left tackle in the NFL. They also drafted Caleb Lomu in the first round out of Utah, who can be either their right tackle or left tackle, depending on what they need. And hopefully he can come in and be a good starter or be a good piece for them wherever he's needed. They did lose a little bit on defense. They lost one of their top sack getters in Clavion Chason. They drafted Gabe Yakis out of Illinois in the second round. Hopefully he can come in and be a good force for them, and they have done enough to continue to stay atop of the AFC East. Now, moving on to the New York Jets. Their question is Geno Smith a good enough quarterback to help turn around this Jets offense? So they brought in Geno Smith in the offseason to be their starting quarterback. And they have a lot of talent on their offense. Obviously, they've got, returning Breece Hall, a very talented running back. Garrett Wilson, who has been a very good receiver since entering the league in 2021, but they've had subpar quarterback play. They added two, very good receiving weapons, very good offensive weapons in the first round of this year's draft, drafting Omar Cooper out of Indiana, a wide receiver, and then an athletic freak of a tight end in Kenyon Sadiq. They've also been improving their offensive line the past few years. The offensive line is very good. But can Geno Smith, is he good enough to help turn them around? They were a terrible offense passing the football last season. Combined, all their quarterbacks only threw for a little over 2,000 yards. So obviously, Geno Smith on paper is absolutely an improvement from anything they've had the past couple of years. But what Geno Smith are we going to get? Are we going to get the Geno Smith from when he was playing well in Seattle, or are we going to get the Geno Smith that was with the Raiders last season, who halfway through the year, I believe, was very close to the top of the NFL in interceptions thrown, and was one of the bigger reasons that the Raiders had the number one overall pick, and went and got rid of Geno and brought in Kirk Cousins and Fernando Mendoza, drafting Fernando Mendoza number one overall. So if we get the a few years ago Seattle Seahawks Geno Smith, I think this Jets offense should be in very good shape and should be able to be a very competitive team. If we get how we looked last year with the Raiders Geno Smith, the only thing they're going to be competing for is the number one overall pick. So whichever Geno they get, really, I think will be a drastic difference on their team. So that is my question for the Jets: is will Geno Smith help actually turn their offense around? The next team I'll talk about is the Miami Dolphins. My main question for them is who is going to take over as their top wide receiver? They lost their two top wide receivers this offseason. They lost Tyreek Hill. He missed most of last season with a very severe knee injury. And they also traded Jalen Waddle in the offseason to the Denver Broncos. So, they brought in quarterback Malik Willis after getting rid of Tua, but who's going to be his number one receiver? They still have Malik Washington from last year, but he is, I think, more so a slot gadget type receiver. In free agency, they added Tutu Atwell and Jalen Tolbert, who are two guys that have never really been number one receivers on their team. They've been very good number two receivers, can step up when needed, but have never been consistently true number one guys. And they drafted two guys that could hopefully make a difference for them in Caleb Douglas out of Texas Tech and Chris Bell out of Louisville. Caleb Douglas led Texas Tech in receiving yards last season. He's a very good big body guy, about 6'4", so very big body receiver, can be a true outside guy. And Chris Bell, I think Dolphins got this guy on a steal in the draft, drafting him in the third round, because he tore his ACL late into his last year at Louisville last season. So some question marks about if he's going to be ready to play. I think if he's ready to go week one, he's the best receiver on the Miami Dolphins. Fully healthy, he was arguably the best receiver in this year's draft class, but injury concerns caused him to slip. I think the Dolphins got an absolute steal with him if he is healthy, and he could be the guy that actually stands out and takes over as this team's number one. But for now, we will have to, kind of wait and see how this receiving core develops. Moving on to the AFC South, my biggest question, so starting off with the Houston Texans, my biggest question for them is, can CJ Stroud get back to close to what he was as a rookie and help carry this team, back deep into the playoffs? So he's had the past couple of years, he has struggled. I don't think he even got to play all that great. So he came in, he did suffer an injury last year. He missed a couple games. And Davis Mills was able to keep this team afloat because they had a very good defense that helped out. They still have that very good defense. They improved their offensive line. They brought in David Montgomery to hopefully be their full-time starting running back. I think he is a very good running back as he was in Detroit. So CJ Stroud, mainly, can he just come in and be consistent and play at a level similar or close to what he did as a rookie, to help lead this team, not just win the division and win a wild card game, but help be able to lead them deep into the playoffs, because he's coming off of a very poor playoff performance in which his defense played very good against the Patriots, but unfortunately he threw 5 interceptions, which wound up really costing them the game. So can he come in and just be a very good game manager for them? I think if he can do that, he can lead the Texans very far this season. Next team, the Indianapolis Colts. What does this offense look like with Daniel Jones coming off of his Achilles injury? So quarterback Daniel Jones started off the season very good. The team started the year 8-2 last season, and we're trying to run away with the division. Looks like one of the better teams in the league. And then week 14, Daniel Jones tears his Achilles, out for the rest of the year. The team crumbles. They wound up losing their last 7 games of the year. I understand a couple of them, they did have a healthy Daniel Jones, but once Daniel Jones went out with his Achilles injury, they didn't really have the contingency plan at quarterback. They brought in Phillip Rivers out of retirement the last week of the season. They had Riley Leonard getting his first start of his career as a rookie. So if Daniel Jones can come back, Achilles injuries are always very tricky. Obviously, the two most recent ones we have are 2 years ago, when both Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins tore their Achilles. And you could tell the next year that they just weren't playing like they were before their injuries. So what does this offense look like if Daniel Jones is able to play, but he's not 100%? Is he still going to be good enough to win games? Can he be a good pocket passer? Because most of Daniel Jones' career, he has been a very good runner and hadn't been asked to do much with his arm. So just if he, coming off his injuries, what does he look like? How does this offense look with him at quarterback coming off of that injury. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. The question I have for them is, can Trevor Lawrence continue what he was doing last season at quarterback? So this is his second year with their second year with their current head coach. I'm blanking on his name. It's the second year in his system. Trevor Lawrence had a very good year last season. This offense played very well, but Trevor Lawrence unfortunately has a history of not being very consistent. He'll have, a great year and then a down year, or he'll have a stretch of some very good games and then some down games. Can he stay consistent throughout the entire season under this Liam Cohen offense for his second season with Liam Cohen? Is my main question for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans, the biggest questions that I have for them is, can Cam Ward take a second year leap with their new offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll? And how does their team and their culture look now that they have brought Robert Saleh in as their new head coach? So they brought in, obviously, Brian Daboll to be their offensive coordinator. So he can do with Cam Ward, who had, again, shown flashes as a rookie, played decent, had games where he played decent, but, can Brian Daboll get him to a second year really leap? And, Cam Ward can really show off why he was the number one overall draft pick in 2025 and why he was such a hyped prospect going into the year, or going into the draft and going into his rookie season. They added a couple of key pieces around him on offense. They brought in Cornell Tate in the draft. They drafted him number 4 overall. And they also brought in Wan'Dale Robinson in free agency, who has experience working with Brian Daboll. Just, what can this offense do? What can Cam Ward do under Brian Daboll? And then, what does this team's culture look like with Robert Saleh as their next head coach? Robert Saleh has always been a very good defensive-minded coach. He was that when he was the head coach of the Jets. They always had very good defenses, but their offense was a little lackluster. And last season, he was the defensive coordinator of the 49ers, and they dealt with a ton of injuries, but their defense was still very good. Does he bring some of that over to Tennessee, and they can help, and he really helps elevate their defense? And then his hirings and his bringing in Brian Daboll help elevate their offense. So those are the questions that I have for the Tennessee Titans. Finally, moving on to the AFC West. I'm going to start with the Denver Broncos. The biggest question I have for the Denver Broncos is, can they remain at the top of the AFC West? Broncos obviously won the AFC West last season. They were the number 1 seed in the entire AFC. I believe they lost 2 games out of last season. They played a lot of very, very close games. But they have kept a lot of their core pieces. They have obviously Bo Nix coming back, but what is he going to look like coming off his ankle injury? And they still have Courtland Sutton, a wide receiver. They brought in Jalen Waddle to be a very good piece opposite of Courtland Sutton. They brought J.K. Dobbins back at running back. They obviously still have R.J. Harvey, who as a rookie showed some flashes. They brought in Jonah Coleman, a very talented running back from the University of Washington in the draft. They still have a very good, defense, still be one of the top defenses in the league. However, Sean Payton is giving up play calling duties for the offense to Davis Webb. So question, how is his play calling going to differ from Sean Payton's? And then, is Bo Nix going to return to the form he was in last season? Or is he going to regress a little bit due to the healing from the ankle injury? So those questions is, how are they going to look? But, can they stay on top of this division, which is one of the tougher divisions in the entire NFL? Now, moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs. Their question I have for them is, what does this offense look like with Patrick Mahomes coming off of his knee injury because he tore his ACL late last season. It was like week 15 or 16. He tore his ACL. He looks to be on track to start week 1, but what is he going to look like coming off of that injury? And then what is this run game going to look like with bringing in Kenneth Walker? Because this is a team that last season really struggled to run the ball with Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt was their most efficient running back, but he was more so a short yardage goal line guy. And then Isaiah Pacheco couldn't really get anything going. Well, now they bring in a Super Bowl MVP running back in Kenneth Walker, but Kenneth Walker has had his own injury issues in the past. He's usually going to miss a handful of games. He's going to get beat up. And he's going to miss a couple of games throughout a season. Is that going to continue? Is he going to be able to play a full healthy season? Maybe he early on in the season can help take a lot of pressure off of Patrick Mahomes while he's still fully recovering from his knee injury. And then maybe by the time Kenneth Walker gets a little banged up, Patrick Mahomes is fully recovered from his injury and back at 100% and looking like MVP caliber Patrick Mahomes to kind of help carry the offense through the later of seasons. But we'll have to wait to see how that goes out. But big questions are Patrick Mahomes coming off his injury, and then how does bringing Kenneth Walker help their run game? Next, moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers. My biggest question for them is really what does this offense look like under Mike McDaniel? They brought in former Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel to be their offensive coordinator going into this season. He is somebody that has always had a great offensive mind in Miami. He always had some very top offenses. So what can he do in LA with Justin Herbert, who is always talked about as a top tier quarterback, although he has had some struggles in the playoffs? He has a couple of very young, talented wide receivers in Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, who complement each other very well. He's got a very talented second-year running back in Amari Hampton, who, if he can stay healthy this season, he missed a couple months last year with an ankle injury, his rookie season, but if he can stay healthy this season, what can he look like? They also have Gadsden, who's a very athletic tight end. They brought in David Njoku, who's another very athletic tight end. They should have a fully healthy offensive line. They have a fully offensive line going into the season. So what can they really do with Mike McDaniels and all these, very good offensive pieces? Can it finally be enough to, push the Chargers over the edge and, get them, deeper into the playoffs or not have a first round playoff exit and playoff collapse? And finally, the final team I want to talk about is the Las Vegas Raiders. And the main question for them is, when does Fernando Mendoza take over as the starting quarterback? Obviously, they drafted Fernando Mendoza, number 1 overall in this past year's draft, but they also brought in Kirk Cousins in free agency. They hired Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator from the Seahawks, to be their head coach, offensive-minded guy. So, just kind of wait and see what happens with this quarterback competition. Right now, it looks like Kirk Cousins is the guy going into training camp, and it is speculated and projected that he is going to at least start the season for them. But how long can he really go for? A couple of years ago with the Falcons, when they brought in Kirk Cousins and then drafted Michael Penix in the first round, he made it a little over half the season, and then his play started to deteriorate over the next few weeks, and then finally towards the end of the season, Michael Penix came in. Does that same thing happen with the Raiders and with Mendoza? Does Kirk Cousins come out and start really well, and then maybe towards the back half of the season they put Mendoza in? Is it the first month and they put Mendoza in? Does Mendoza come out and just outright win the job. This will be a very interesting quarterback competition, and really that question for the Raiders will be there for, when do you play Fernando Mendoza? It will be there up until they play him. Whether Kirk Cousins plays well, it'll especially be there if Kirk Cousins has a down game of, when are you going to put in Fernando, when are you going to put in your number 1 overall pick? When can we see what we have in the young guy? But I'm interested to see, when Clint Kubiak feels ready to put Mendoza out there. I'm curious, does Mendoza come out and just win the job outright? Does he wind up sitting the entire season? Does Kirk Cousins play that well that this whole year can kind of be a sit and learn year for Mendoza? Or does, Mendoza, find a way into the lineup, whether it's from his development throughout the season or Kirk Cousins regressing throughout the season? So that is something that is interesting to see and watch and see how it unfolds. Those are my questions for the AFC, for each AFC team going into and throughout the 2026 NFL season. If it's anything that you have questions for a team that you can think of that I didn't think of, let me know in the comments. As I mentioned, at some point I will also do an NFC version of this, so I'll go through each NFC team. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, see ya.